I would like to speak about some Old Testament issues and hopefully clarify some things I've heard some people say against the Bible, and especially regarding the Old Testament. Think about the example of Solomon, the bad example of King Solomon. 1 Kings 11:1, it says, Solomon loved many strange women, strange here meaning foreign, together with the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, and Hittites. And in that same context, in verse 7, it says, Then did Solomon build a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, in the hill that is before Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. Notice here the Scriptures criticize Solomon for marrying these foreign women, these strange women, and it specifically mentions some of them were Moabites, just like Ruth was. Ruth was a Moabite, a Moabitess, right? A female Moabite. But in the book of Ruth, we learn that Boaz married Ruth. Boaz was a Jewish man, she was a Moabite. And yet the Bible never criticizes Boaz for marrying a foreign woman. Well, why? And when we look at the Old Testament, it's repeated several times throughout the Old Testament, there was a prohibition that men of Israel were not to marry outside their nation. They were not to marry all the ites, right? The Moabites, Ammonites. They weren't to marry these people. And if you read the context here in 1 Kings 11, it mentions that as well, and it's mentioned in some other places. So why do Scriptures criticize Solomon but not Boaz? Right? Because in essence, they did the same thing. Well, again, I would like to clarify some things skeptics will raise against the Bible. This is not a racial issue. Again, no matter what critics and skeptics might say, the Bible is not a racist book. I've heard people try to claim that the God of the Bible is racist, xenophobic, and things like that. It simply is false. In fact, the Bible teaches there's only one race, the human race. We are all descendants of Adam. And we sing the song, red or yellow, black or white, they are precious in His sight. That's true. The gospel is for all. Again, the gospel and the Bible is anti-racist. You know what's going to make someone racist? Believing that we all evolved from apes. And obviously we're different, so if we're different, who's more evolved than the next person? And if I'm more evolved than you, then I must be better, right? That's going to promote racism and division. The Bible does not promote those kinds of ideas. Again, it says we all come from Adam. We all are human beings. Again, it doesn't matter what our skin color is. So, again, these marriage prohibitions in the Old Testament had absolutely nothing to do with racial issues. Neither was the concern a spouse's nationality, the nationality of the spouse in and of itself. And again, we can see this in Ruth's story. We can see this in other biblical examples. Moses' wife was an Ethiopian. She was of a different nation than Moses. And it's an interesting story. You can read Numbers 12. God blessed their marriage and even defended it. If you read Numbers 12, Miriam and Aaron said some hurtful things to Moses about his marriage, right? Marriage to an Ethiopian woman. But God defended him. So again, there's a marriage in the Old Testament, one of the most godly, if not the most highly esteemed man in the Old Testament, Moses. And again, nothing wrong with his marriage to an Ethiopian woman. Again, Boaz was an Israelite and Ruth was a Moabite. They were two different nationalities, and yet God blessed their marriage. We can see that, I think, very clearly from the whole book, that God blessed their marriage. So if the concern is not race and the concern is not nationality, then why did God in the Old Testament period command His people, telling them, do not marry foreigners, right? People of foreign nation. Well, it's explained to us. We're told why. Here's Deuteronomy 7, verses 3 and 4. Neither shalt thou make marriages with them, again, those outside of Israel. It says, thy daughter thou shalt not give unto his son, nor his daughter shalt thou take unto thy son, for they will turn away thy son from following me, that they may serve other gods. so will the anger of the Lord be kindled against you and destroy thee suddenly. So again, these prohibitions in the Old Testament were about differing religions, right? Or we might say, some people might say worldviews. That's the point. When a believer in God marries someone who has a different belief system, not always, but very often it results in the believer losing his faith or her faith. So that is why this prohibition existed in the Old Testament. Now, in the New Testament, we don't have a clear-cut statement like this. There's no New Testament verse where it says, you Christians never marry a non-Christian. Right? That would be an easy verse to find. I will say this, though. I think that's a very wise principle. So when we think about Ruth and Boaz, again, all these things I just discussed, none of these things were an issue with them because they were of the same faith. Ruth converted. She became a believer in the true God, and her faith was evident to Boaz. He understood she was a virtuous woman, a good woman. Again, and within that time in history, meaning she believed in God and he trusted that. So they had the same faith, and God blessed their marriage, even though she was a Moabite and he was an Israelite.